So I'm doing a little brainstorming here, so you can follow my train of thought. I need to make a crank puller, not a bearing puller, a crank puller. And I need to do it before anybody comes up with this idea. So, Husqvarna has already made the tool. They have the tool, you can buy it through them, but why would you do that when you can make one yourself? And I am literally just brainstorming this out pretty much in real time here. So what's the problem? Define the problem. The problem is that when you, actually this is stuck on here. When you have a crank from a 372, often, or lots of other saws, but let's take a Husqvarna 372. Often you'll actually buy these aftermarket cases that have the bearings and seals already installed. Now this one doesn't, but I'm going to use it as kind of my test case. So I'm initially going to do it off the thing, and now, of course, that's on there pretty tight, but won't matter for now. Anyway, this is a Husky 372, 365, and Husky 362, even crank, it doesn't really matter. These are 6202 bearings, and when you have the bearings and seals installed in here, how are you going to get them through? If you have a seal here and you heat it and try to drop it through, and when this is chilled, you can bugger the seal, so you don't want to do that. First thing comes to mind is take the seal out. If you want to use the bearings that come with the case or whatever, is fine, but still, how are you going to draw the crank through without damaging anything? So I really don't like the idea of pulling on the outer race at all. I like the idea of taking one of these, taking the bearing, dropping, heating this up, cold bearing, dropping it in. And then, once it's in, and in the right spot, then you draw the crank through the bearing, but you do it by putting pressure on the inner race and pulling the crank. So you push down on the inner race and pull the crank. That's the objective. How are we going to do that? There is a tool that you can use to do that. There's a sleeve that goes over there, and then you screw down the tool here, and then you tighten it down, and it just does that. I don't know how much that tool is, but I really don't feel like paying for it. So let's make one. So I've got a piece of 3/4 inch threaded rod. I think this is 3/4 inch. Don't think it's 5 inches. Let's check. 7.40. So yeah, that's 0.74. So that's threaded rod that is 3/4 of an inch. Now I need to, I think, I've cut this to roughly 6 inches, whatever. The length is relatively arbitrary. You need some length, and you'll see why here in a minute. I need to actually drill and tap this for whatever that is. Now, why am I doing it for this end and not that end? Well, this end is much bigger, and I don't know what that thread size is. So eventually we can do it for that, and we'll get there. Obviously, it'd be a lot easier with a lathe to do this, but the objective here is to do this without anything that's super fancy, okay? So I've got a center punch, and I'm punching the approximate center here. I'm pretty sure the size here is M8. It's M8 by 1. It's fine thread. I'm going to get this drilled and tapped. Don't know exactly how deep it needs to be, so we'll put it down there pretty good. Almost done with the drilling. Now we take the tap and tap it. Again, easier with a lathe, which I do have access to, but I'm kind of curious if I can do this. Don't have to watch me tapping this, I'm just doing this as if I don't know what I'm doing. Next step is to tighten two nuts against one another. That way you can hold them. You can weld it too, again, if you have a welder, which I do, but not going to bother using it. Again, the whole point here is to see if we can do this without fancy tools. Does this thread on? Oh, yes it does. Is it straight up and down? Not exactly, but maybe that'll matter, maybe it won't. Let's find out. I've got a number of ideas for this. This is a sleeve. It actually goes on the other side. It's actually the PTO oil seal sleeve. Thinking maybe I could use that. Why not? Now that washer is not going to be good for long, but it might be good for just long enough. Put another washer on there. So then you hold, once this is threaded down, then you hold this. And then we're going to see if this actually presses on. So I'll just turn this. And as is, that seems to be going. Now let's see what happens if I do this. I can unscrew the whole thing. Now this washer is kind of in the way. I happen to have these. Yeah, those will fit. Again, we're not going to get that much out of this, but let's see if this goes down. Sure. Easy peasy there. Okay. So these washers look like they're going to take us all the way home. Or, oh, better yet, this does not have to be threaded all the way down. Just, you want it loose. And then this is what actually does the tightening. And that bearing is going on. Now this is all done at room temperature, okay? So there's no heat or cooling or nothing. And the bushing seems to be unharmed. That's fantastic. It's a brand new bushing. I'd rather not destroy it. That's fantastic that that actually worked. Let's get it off. Pull this off. I have my bearing puller right here. So use the bearing puller. We're just going to pull this back off because this is just an experiment. If you don't have a Harbor Freight bearing puller, you kind of need one. I don't really see any way around it. But the bearing pusher here, I think is going to work. So let's take it to the next level. I was trying to think, what else could I use instead of using this really nice bushing here, which clearly works. But instead of using this nice bushing, what could I use that could be cheap and effective? And I thought, well, what about an extra scrunch? What about a scrunch? Would that work? I've got another idea. This is actually a 6203 bearing. It's too big. What if I used the inner race from this 6203 bearing? I just popped the the race holder or the bearing holder out, the balls come right out. And now I've got an inner race here. The outer race I think I can toss. But now I've got the inner race here, which is sloppy fit. But let's see if we can do this again with the inner race. Now, one other thing that's kind of crucial is if you're going to do this in the case, it has to be, whatever you're using has to go through. So, good. And the answer is, it works perfectly. Okay, now the one thing that I am seeing is that with something that is sloppy fit, you don't want to bugger, if we're doing this on a case, you don't want to bugger where the seal goes. So you do have to be careful of that. Let's take this off, put it in the case, and see if we can pull it through. So just to prove there's not a whole lot of trickery here. No, what is it, 90 degrees? So I've got this cooled down more or less. It's not appreciably hot. This is the flywheel side of the case. So if I was going to put a 372 chassis together today, what I would do is I would actually take the PTO side, drop the bearing in. The bearing would be chilled in the fridge. The case would be heated with a torch, gentle. Bearing gets dropped in and it looks like this. Then you heat up the bearing, the inner race of the bearing, just heat that up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Once that's hot, you drop a chilled crank right in there and it'll go in, boom, done, perfect. Okay, once you got that, then messing with this side of the case becomes kind of tricky, and heating it and cooling it and all that stuff. So it's just a lot easier if you can let the whole thing cool and do everything at room temperature. So we're going to assume that this is stuck in the PTO side of the case and that everything is fine there. But we do need to get this down, and we need to get it down in a controlled manner. And this won't go. What do you say? Should we try the inner race? So the 6203 thing here is basically proof of concept that, and actually if you really want to be anal about it, let's put some electrical tape, just so you don't bugger where the seals are. Just a wrap of electrical tape here. Just so you don't bugger the seals. So this is a 6203 inner race. Stick that there. Now let's try my 5/8 washer. A couple of big washers. We're going to tilt this up. Just has to be threaded so it doesn't want to pull out. It does not even need to be super amazingly tight. So now, let's see, will this work? Now what would be really nice is if I happen to have a proper wrench for this, but I can actually hold this with one hand. Let's see if you can see that that's going. This is beautiful because you can, if this actually works, you can very well control how the crank goes into the case when it gets drawn in, and you can make sure that this stays up, right? That would be good, right? So there's the PTO side, and the problem, you've got to keep that upright as you're going, and fiddling with all this stuff, and when it's hot and all that, it makes it very tricky. So here, of course, if you have the positioners, it's not nearly as bad. here, you can just hold this and turn. Okay, so we're going to take this away for now because that's irrelevant because it's not actually holding. If it was holding, this would be a whole lot easier. So one thing I'm noticing right now is right in here, that sleeve, the inner race, is the correct length this direction. A little bit longer would actually be okay, but it's right on about the right length. Well, it's whatever the length of a 6203 is. What is that, 13 millimeters? I don't remember. Anyway, so right now I'm just going to keep turning this. And if I had this elsewise together, I would probably block the crank somehow. Now, what you can do too is that if you know the distance of clearance between the crank and the side of the chassis, you can set that exactly. Or in the case of the 372, this particular crank just gets dropped into this side and will have its own positive stop, and then you keep doing this until you get a good seal all the way around here, because you're bringing the case halves together when you're doing this. But you're going to want to block the rotation of the crank here. Maybe about it. So let's bring this back out. Touch. Back that off. This backs off easy. Sloppy fit. Washers out. The race comes out. And now our crank is in there exactly where we need it. Frankly, this is incredible. I cannot believe that this works. This is absolutely proof of concept that this works. Now what I would do next, obviously, is put the seals in. You can just tap them in from here. But being able to crank that down, wow, that's that's pretty cool. Okay, so what do you need? You need some threaded rod. This is 3/4 threaded rod. And if you're going to do the other side, I don't know, I guess it would work. You just need to, ideally on a lathe would be better, bore that out. But I don't even think you really need this for that other side. If you happen to have a PTO side that comes with a bearing and seal installed, pop out the seal. Oh well. Pop out the seal. Got a good bearing in there. Just heat the bearing, heat the inner race of the bearing, chill the crank, drop the crank in. It should go thunk if it's at the right temperature. Everything should be fine. So once you have the crank installed in here, then you just take this chassis, the flywheel side, drop the bearing in, draw the crank through and the case halves together all at the same time, just like I showed. And then you got it. That's how to do it. And it didn't cost you much of nothing. Literally a piece of 6-inch piece of threaded rod. You can make it longer or shorter, doesn't really matter. If it's too short, no good, but that's a good length. And this is just a sleeve. I think that if you didn't happen to have this sleeve, you could sacrifice a scrunch probably. Not this section, it's going to be too narrow. But you can certainly sacrifice, maybe an inch. I would take an inch out of the center. And that should certainly be enough to grab just the inner race. And then you need a couple of washers, some 5/8 and 3/4 washers just as spacers. In fact, I think 5/8 would probably work just fine by itself. And then you have no pressure, really no chance of dimpling the bearings like this, which is beautiful. That's great. You don't have to have a press. You just have a piece of threaded rod and some washers. So yeah, so you can sacrifice one of these if you need to. Again, one of these is not that expensive. You can get these at HL Supply. They're pretty inexpensive. Or of course at your regular power equipment dealer. Sacrifice one of these. Use it as the sleeve. A little bit of electrical tape maybe if you're really paranoid like that. Cinch it on down, and your case halves are together. That's awesome. So I hope you like this video. I think it's going to be relevant for the guys that are putting together well, pretty much any saw that comes in half like this. Hope this video is helpful to some people. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.